Morning.
Good morning. We are getting settled and start in about 2 minutes when the video will come on.
Great, thank you.
Okay, it is 10 a.m. and I see that our video feed has started. And Dan, you may start the meeting.
Well, good morning. I call this first meeting of the 2019-2020 academic year to order of the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. It's good to have everyone with us. In a moment, we'll begin with some introductions. I do want to bring everyone's attention to the latest copy of the Texas Public Higher Education Almanac, the 2019 edition, with special thanks to the Strategic Planning and Funding Group. This is our early Christmas present. If you're, I think as many of us are, somewhat higher ed nerds, there is a wealth of information in this document that I know I've used many times as I've prepared grant proposals and other reports. So enjoy that light reading as you're returning home today, unless you're driving. That's only if you're flying back to your home location. Before we begin our introductions, just a moment to recognize we actually have a couple of members here today who joined us from Southeast Texas. And I really appreciate seeing my colleagues that came from that direction. And I know with the rest of us in the room, we all join in sending our best hopes and wishes to our colleagues in Southeast Texas. What a challenge again, and I stress that again, and so soon after making progress in many areas and or recovering from Hurricane Harvey. So let's send our best wishes and thoughts to them. With that, let's begin. Just one housekeeping item as we continue. We should have an envelope. That is how we manage taking care of the cost of lunch when we're at our Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee meetings. If you would add the cash to the envelope and pass that to the end of our spaces, we'll have those picked up, so we'll be ready for lunch. With that, I'd like to begin with introductions because we do have some new members of our committee here today. And I'm going to begin by asking my counterpart from the two-year environment, our new co-chair, Kevin Wood, to introduce himself, and then we'll redirect and begin at that end of the table from there.
You haven't introduced yourself, actually.
Good morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to co-chair and work with each of you. My name is Kevin Wood, and I am from North Central Texas College in Gainesville.
And so if we begin, we'll begin on my left.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Borst. I'm from Texas Tech University out in West Texas in Lubbock.
I'm Julie Penley. I'm from El Paso Community College in far West Texas.
I'm Colleen Swain from the University of Texas at Tyler.
Good morning. I'm Jacob Blosser from Texas Woman's University.
Hope Corey from the University of Texas at Dallas.
And of course, I'm Dan Brown from Texas State University.
I'm Reinhold Cornelius. I'm director here at our Division of Academic Quality and Workforce, and I'm together with my colleague Dr. Valdez, the one who organizes and facilitates this committee.
Hello, again, Melinda Valdez, and as Dr. Cornelius said, I work with him in academic quality and workforce.
I'm Veronique Tran. I'm from Lee College in Baytown, Texas.
John Quintanilla, University of North Texas in Denton.
Homer Guevara Jr., Northwest Vista College, part of the Alamo Colleges District in San Antonio.
Good morning. My name is Benson Karaoke from Javas Christian College in Hawkins, Texas.
Frank Graves, Dean of Workforce Public Service, McLennan Community College.
Good morning. I'm Dave Platt. I'm from the University of Texas at Austin and nominated to replace Larry Abram, who retired in August.
Good morning. I'm Missy Chapa from Texas A&M Corpus Christi. I am standing in for Dr. Melissa Jarrell.
If we could, let's make sure, and I apologize for not bringing us to that point of our orientation. If we are going to be speaking on the mic, let's hit that red button. And as long as the red button's lit, that means we're live. So after you've completed your remarks, go ahead and turn that off if you so do.
Monica Villarreal, Texas State Technical College.
Crystal Seahorn, University of Houston, Clear Lake.
Well, thank you all for being with us today as we begin this important year's work. With that, our first agenda item. Would those who are with us on the phone please identify themselves to the group?
Good morning. It's Dayreese Reedhart from Lone Star College in the Houston area.
Hi, this is Terry Long from the University of Houston.
And good morning. This is Jose Rojas calling from UTMB in Galveston.
We certainly appreciate you all being able to join us today by telephone for this meeting. Thank you. With that, are we ready to move on to our second agenda item, an orientation for the work of the committee? And with that, I will turn it back over to my guest, my leader from the coordinating board, Rhino Cornelius.
So this agenda item, orientation for the work of UEAC, we have been adding for a couple of years now at the September meeting because there are quite a few members who are new and you don't necessarily know how we do things, and so it may be a good opportunity to bring us on the same page how we operate and what we do. So you all were nominated by your institution to the UEAC, the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. That committee is formed by the coordinating board, or was formed by the coordinating board. It is does not come out of statute, but it's governed by the Texas Administrative Code, the rules, and that is similar to other committees we have, like the Graduate Education Advisory Committee, the GEAC, we call it, or the Learning Technology Advisory Committee, the LTAC. And all these committees are similarly structured, and their purpose is to provide the board, and with that, the commissioner, advice and recommendations. And that's our function here. And having that purpose, we go into a couple other points, which Melinda can help us go through.
Hello again. So first for logistics, as you see there in your packet, in the lobby upon your arrival, it is necessary and required that you sign in electronically so you can get your name badge, and I see everyone has done that. In the event of evacuation of the building, over here to my right, there's some double doors. As soon as you go through those double doors, there's a single door to your right that'll empty out into the parking lot. So that's the direction you should go should we have to evacuate. Break room and restrooms are outside this hall, outside in this hall rather, on the other side of this wall. If you have any questions, please ask staff. We'll help you to direct you to them. Lunch break is at noon, or we try to stay close, a little bit before, a little bit after, around noonish. 30 minutes to an hour, just depending on what we're doing at that particular meeting, and we can talk about that and discuss that. There is a catered lunch on site here in the boardroom. Again, it's $10 cash that we provide envelopes for you to put that in, and Ms. Christina Kelly, she's raising her hand back there. She'll collect those. If you have any questions, speak with her. Again, with the microphone, very important since we are being broadcast that you do push the button whenever you speak, and equally important, push it off again when you're not speaking. You will be picked up, any kind of side conversations or anything to that effect. Members calling in, again, please mute your telephone if you're not speaking and say your name when you're speaking and sharing your thoughts. Please comply with a simple online expense survey that is provided to you. And if you ever have any information, contact information that needs to be updated, any of your immediate colleagues that also work with you in your UEAC membership capacity, like your assistant secretary, please update that with us if that's applicable. The proceedings, again, the co-chairs lead the discussion. The staff of the coordinating board will facilitate background information as needed. And you can also inquire with us if you require or really want to know any new information or have us clarify or elaborate on information that's provided. Voting consideration is done only, again, for consideration agenda items. Informational agenda items or updates do not require committee or member input. Robert's Rules of Order are used for voting. If you have any questions about that, let staff know and we'll help you with that area. Members are tasked to consider a statewide perspective, not just the viewpoint of your particular institution, and along those same lines, just community colleges, just universities, a statewide perspective. Open meeting constraints, it is posted to the Texas Register, open to the public, no quorum of members behind closed doors, including via email conversation. Any questions about that, please let staff know. Non-member speakers are invited by CB staff and/or the committee chair. Meeting materials need to be submitted to us prior to the meeting. Email or call us to discuss. Work group meetings are not open meetings and don't need a quorum of committee members. Lastly, committee operations. Members are expected not to miss 2 meetings in a row. Again, speak with us, email, call us, and we can discuss options and figure out what's going on if that is something that does transpire. We want to work with you, but please know 2 meetings in a row is not expected to occur to be missed. Absent members may delegate non-voting substitute participants, as with Ms. C. Chapa today from A&M Corpus Christi. Again, just email us that with that intent, rather. Members may call in. We'll provide access instructions. Again, Christina Kelly will assist you in that regard. Resigning members are asked to contact us as soon as possible or delegate someone from your institution to do so that we can fill that seat as soon as possible for our meetings. Draft summary notes with action items recorded will be sent by email to members 2 times as soon as possible after a meeting and again prior to the next meeting. Meetings are planned 1 year in advance, and we'll discuss that more after lunch towards the end of our meeting. Our meeting dates, agenda, staff notes, recordings roster, and staff contact info are available on our webpage. The link is provided there for you. You can access past webcasts via our homepage, and there's a direction lead there for you. And if you have any questions about any of these items, please let us know during our lunch break here at the meeting, or email, call us. Are there any questions at this point? Thank you.
So the important point is that the UEAC is another opportunity for you to stay in touch with staff at the coordinating board. So our phone lines and emails are always open, and you can come, and we will either get you to the right person, or we will try to incorporate your concerns into the meetings. Again, to the webpage, it's the /UEAC. And I want to apologize for that right now. Our agency is going through an update of the posting, how it's done. So it turns out modern web pages have more than HTML. They have coding engines behind it, and we are switching that out. So I had trouble getting the new roster up and things like that. But we try to keep that up, so it's a resource for you to find our information and what has been done in the recent past.
Well, there was no need to apologize for that. I think in higher education, we've all been through any number of technology updates and upgrades, so we are wonderfully fluent with how that process seems to move on. Kevin, I'll turn it over to you for our third agenda item.
Thank you, Dan. Agenda item number 3, election of a committee co-chair representing four-year institutions. If you look on page, I believe it's 3 and 4, you see a list of the members of the committee. And if you look on page 10 under agenda item 3, you'll see where the Texas Administrative Code is cited, and it says that we will select a presiding officer who will be responsible for conducting meetings and conveying committee recommendations to the board. The co-chair may also be elected. And so what we will do momentarily is we will elect a co-chair that will serve a staggered term so that we don't have two new chairs at the same time of the committee. And Dr. Brown's term is up in May, and he has told me privately that he would not accept another appointment. And so I will open the floor for any nominations from four-year institution to serve as a co-chair for the UEAC.
So what the UEAC decided a little while ago is to elect the chair always. So typically, one step back, typically we meet twice a year. We could meet more often than that if that is needed or if you decide you would like to meet more often. So the UEAC decided to elect the respective chair, and one comes from two-year institutions and one from four-year institutions, always half a year in advance, so that we don't have to switch out the chair at the meeting and the chair can prepare for the role. And so that's why Dan will be your chair today, and if there's any other meeting till May, and we are electing a chair who would start then next spring.
And the floor is open for nominations.
I want to nominate Crystal Seahorn for the position.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Crystal Seahorn from the University of Houston at Clear Lake.
Yeah, Crystal Seahorn, University of Houston, Clear Lake. I would accept.
Is there a second? Or did I miss the second?
I'll second that nomination.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that Crystal Seahorn be appointed or be elected the co-chair of the UEAC. Are there any other nominations? If not, shall we by general consent elect Crystal Seahorn? Are there any objections? Do we need a recorded vote?
We normally vote, yes. So
Okay.
everybody says aye.
All those in favor of Crystal Seahorn as co-chair for the UEAC representing the four-year institutions, raise your right hand. Those opposed, same sign. Being no objections, Crystal, you've been elected. Congratulations.
Kevin, ask the people online.
I'm sorry. The people online, I'm sorry. I did not mean to ignore you. Are there any nominations from online? Or objections?
No nominations or objections.
Being none, then now you're elected co-chair.
Congratulations. Okay, we move on to consider summary notes from the April 26th, 2019 minutes. Let's give everyone a couple of moments just to reflect and review one more time, and then we would entertain a motion to approve the summary notes as written.
Or has changed.
Or changed.
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
So we've received a motion to approve the minutes as presented. Is there a second to the motion? Motion has
I
been...
second. This is Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie. So the motion, we have moved and seconded that we accept the minutes of our previous meeting as presented. Any further discussion before we move to a vote on that motion? Seeing none, I would like to ask for those in favor of accepting the minutes as presented to respond by saying aye.
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 Including our guests in the telephone world. Anyone opposed, please? Anyone opposed, please share no. Seeing none, any abstentions? So by acclamation with no votes against or an abstention for the vote. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you all. I have two things I would like to mention. So we try to improve UEAC ever so slightly, step by step, as we go along with our procedure. So a while ago, we were asked to send members the minutes as quickly as we can after the meeting, and we try to do that, even though that sometimes is hard. But we do that, and then we email it out again before the meeting so that you can go back. We don't post the meeting notes on the website till they are approved. So given our webpage, after this meeting, we'll post these minutes or meeting notes. It always has bothered me that there is nothing on our webpage of what you have done. So I will try to put up not notes, but staff notes, and I will be very brief with that and just saying if you had a consideration what it was, or if you have a task for us to do what it was, and that will help also me as staff not to let it slide because it's a very brief note on that. We'll see how that goes, but then at least we have something. The other thing I wanted to mention is that once a year, one of the co-chairs of this committee is asked to present to the board of the Corning Board, and that happens at the June CAUSE meeting. That is the Committee of Academic Workforce and Success of the board. And it's a brief presentation. It's normally something like 5 minutes, and then there are questions maybe afterwards. And in light of transparency, so that you know what happens, I put the link on there. So all our open meetings are recorded, like this meeting, and available on YouTube. But, you know, they may be long. They may be 5 hours long. So you can scroll through. But I did that for you. And so at 30 minutes, Dan comes up and talks to the cause. And you may look at that if you like. So thank you. And thank you for presenting.
I will address agenda item 5, discussion and consideration of Texas core curriculum and transfer issues. Updates on parts of SB 25, and those are on page 1 under agenda item 5. And Reinhold, do you have anything that you'd like to share with us or add to this?
Yes, this is the big one. Because as when you were here and when you read the meeting notes, there was, at the April meeting, there was draft of Senate Bill 25, and you all discussed that at length and gave a lot of input into it. As it turns out, Senate Bill 25, when it came out at the end of the day, was quite a bit different. So I would like to go through it, what happened, because that's the big transfer bill, quote-unquote transfer bill, and go through what all the things are we have to do now, and then we can see what the implications are for our committee. And that's all wrapped up in this agenda item about transfer issues. So on the first 3 pages of the materials you have, is a staff summary of the Senate bill, and we went section by section through it, and so there are 13 sections listed. There are actually 2 more. I show you them at the end, but they are not, they're just when things terminate. So the section 1 is the reporting section, and that gives new requirements for institutions to report about classes taken. Section 2, and we go about what I will discuss the next pages, what we have to do for that. So the first section is the reporting requirement. The section 2 is the common admission application form. So that's Apply Texas, and there is a change which somebody has to act on. Then section 3 and 4 are both with the requirements for filing a decree plan, and that changed basically when that is done and it makes all of that earlier in a student's life. Section 5 is the section about, it has actually two parts to it because it refers to the same section in the statute. But the first part is about recommended course sequences, and that is something institutions have to do to show course sequences for their programs. And it's something they do already, I think, but it has to be formalized and open now, and sort of unified in a form. And the second part is articulation agreements, and that's also something institutions do, we know. It just puts it into statute that they can do it and are encouraged to do it. Section 6 is about student academic information and the release of that. There are also changes how that can be done. Section 7 is an important one about appropriations because it impacts what kind of courses can be offered in dual credit and be funded. And it's basically expanding that from what it was to also include field of study and program of study courses. Then Section 8 introduces a new term. That's the term of the meta major, and it has a definition for it. And that plays into Section 9, which is really much of it what you discussed at the last meeting, only at the last meeting we thought it may become statute to be implemented, but it changed. The final Senate Bill 25, it's now a study how it can be implemented. And basically, the coordinating board has to form a committee, and they have to work rather quickly in 1 year to come up with a study and recommendations. And we'll talk about that in a second. And Section 10 says that everything with regards to core curriculum, if it's changed through the rules, the Texas Administration Code has to be changed by a negotiated rulemaking. And we'll talk about that a little bit more too. The rest, Section 11, 12, 13, are then cleanup of language and the implications in the rest of the statute. And I also printed for you the entire bill, two pages later at the end of this part. And that's the pages with the underlined lines, because in a bill, all new lines in the statute are underlined, and everything that's changed is crossed out. So that is the Senate Bill 25. And The thing is, it's very difficult, to me at least, to find and detect the nuances. Sometimes the little words in the statute change, and we can make a summary, and some colleague says, well, wait a second, you know, and then we have to go back to the statute or the bill itself. So that is the overview of the statute, what came out. And then on the pages numbered 4 and 5 in the materials and titled Actions for Senate Bill 25, again, staff put together what we see has to be done. And that I organized that again by section, so it's parallel to the first 3 pages of summary. And now it gets more complicated. So section 1, we said, is new reporting requirements. And as it turns out, there are really 2 parts to it. One is for all institutions, and one is for community colleges. And the statute requires that institutions list courses that were accepted for the major or not accepted, and the purpose or the reason why it was accepted and the reason why it was not accepted. On the face of that seems okay and easy, but that is really very complicated because institutions have that data, but they may not be easily have that data pulled out. You know, it requires some heavy lifting to get this. So there are 2 ideas which, so this coordinating board, and when I say coordinating board, that is all sorts of people, commissioners, the commissioner and assistant, deputy commissioner, assistant commissioners, and other staff have been talking to stakeholders about this, and they are still talking about it. And so the idea for the reporting for all institutions is that we create some kind of canned scenarios, if you will. There are certain reasons why a course is not accepted, and there are certain reasons why it is accepted, and they will be the same for everyone, and then we can pull that data based on that. There may be other reasons, and there will be, you know, options to state that, I'm sure. But here's what I list in here is just an attempt, the first go through, if you will, what kind of questions or criteria or indices, if you will, there are why a course is not accepted either for the major or for the academic purpose. And I listed them here, not that this is what will be there in the end, and I want to emphasize this. It says here it's not finalized, but to give you an idea what kind of things people are looking for. And so that allows you then to think this through, or go to your colleagues at home and think this through, and maybe come back to us and to yourself here in this forum to give us input. So that's my hope with this, that you think this and discuss this, and then let me know if you have input into this. Because I'm actually not involved with this personally, at this point at least, you never know. But it's you know, there's a lot of data people who are involved with that, but I can always talk to them. And I will if something comes out of that. With regards to the second reporting requirement for community colleges, there's even more so that we actually feel we have that data already reported. It just has to be utilized and pulled together. And so, again, people here at the coordinating board have talked to TACRO, the Texas Association of Registers, the registrar organization. And so that is the plan to go forward with that. I don't know any details about that, but so it's a matter of deciding how much we want to give ideas or look at it, for this particular part of the bill. And here I probably should make a break now because that's a pretty big part if you want to discuss something.
Would it be helpful to the group, because I believe as we go back to our constituents to talk about these 9 pieces that the coordinating board staff have identified, I think we probably have the time today with our agenda. If we could go through those one at a time and make sure we're all defining that equally, so that we don't go home with different interpretations of what that is. Is everyone amenable to that? The first one then is core course, but another core course on students' records satisfies same foundational component area. Is there any confusion about why that would not be, create an issue with respect to the application of that course to the student's record at transfer? Is that right? Is that the appropriate way to say it, Reinhold? What we're looking at is reasons why a student's transferred course would not be applied to their degree plan at the receiving institution. And with that then, we're also thinking, I think, along the lines of what would be the reason why that course would not be transferable as degree credit if we had some sort of reporting system at our campus. Is everyone on the same page with that? Okay, for the first one then, are there any thoughts or issues? Are we clear on what that means? General nodding of heads? Okay.
Just one question of clarification. So would this, for reporting, would this be, so presumably such a course would count toward electives as opposed to the core. Is that something that we're worried about here, or is it that just doesn't apply to the core?
Very good question, John. And I would respond to that for programs that lack significant numbers of electives due to accreditation issues and other issues. I don't know that that relates perfectly in that setting.
Yeah, I think this is for major, it says not apply to the major declared at the time of transfer. So it's more than the core. And if it is applied to the major as an elective, it would be applied to the major.
Mm-hmm.
So it would not be not applied to the major, So that's when it becomes complicated, probably, how to pull this data and list it. Because there must be some, I'm not a registrar, but there must be some logic behind it to pull this automatically.
And that's a point, though, I do want to, that has been something I've discussed with a number of colleagues. If we look at it very neatly, a particular course does not apply to the major declared at the time of transfer. While this is not a finalized list, the following reasons are under consideration. And one of the things I think we need to be very clear about is the portions of a degree. It is not applied to the degree at time of transfer because the degree is going to include the core curriculum, any university general degree requirements, major, potentially minor, things such as that. And so sometimes reading this kind of information, major isn't a clear term with respect to the undergraduate degree. And I think that's something that's really important to remember, because you could be very clear that there might be 32 hours required for the major, 45 hours required for the major, but 120 for the degree. So that's why I was going with your question about the elective, John, is that very point. Okay, do we want to continue to number 2? Core course, but major requires different preparatory course that also satisfies core. And I think this is a great one to think about for a moment. So if I'm walking through this, the student has presented a core course for transfer, but the major at the receiving institution requires a different course as a preparatory course for the major in the core. Is that what everyone's understanding? Has that been everyone's understanding of this bill? Okay. Number 3, field of study course. Discipline of field of study different from discipline of students major at receiving institution. Discipline of field of study different from the discipline of the students. Could someone walk me through that?
The way that I read this is that the field of study says which specific CIP codes apply, and so this would be something where the CIP code for the field of study is different than the CIP code of the declared major. That's the way that I would read this.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you, John, because my impression was that there was alignment in the SIP code between the sending and receiving institution, but that clarifies that the student's major at the receiving institution may not indeed be that same SIP code. Okay. Number 4, field of study course not aligned to curriculum of major, content taught at upper division. I see nodding of heads from universities here. We may need to think about this one. Julie.
I do have a question about this item, and then item 5. Is the interpretation of this that these are subjective to the receiving institution, or are we saying that we don't agree with the courses that the working groups proposed and that the board accepted as the field of study?
I don't think has anything to do with acceptance. I mean, the field of study are rule at that point. So it says that the curriculum at the receiving institution teaches it at a different course, and so it wasn't accepted, that course.
So, to the receiving institution? Yes. Right. So it sort of sounds like the earlier conversations that this committee has had about whether receiving institutions want to receive them, and more specifically, four-year institutions, because we could have a transfer from community college to community college. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like this concern might be related to, we at University X, we've always taught this course as a senior level, and now we're a little itchy about the possibility of accepting it as a lower division credit. Is that what this possible question might be?
My question is, does the university, the receiving institution, get to decide whether it is transferable or not? Are they the ones that are going to decide, even though we have a field of study where a course is part of that field of study? The receiving institution can say, sorry, we're not going to take it. We're going to make you take it over at a 3,000 or 4,000 level. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, please.
Might I give just a real quick kind of real-life example? I was co-chair of the history field of study committee that met over the course of, 18 months or so. And an example of this that we talked about was the Texas history course, which is a part of the history field of study. It's a 2,000 level course. Many institutions teach this at 3,000 and 4,000 levels. And there was much conversation about what those institutions were going to do. I don't know that we ever came to resolution about what they were going to do. It's in the field of study. It's going to, whether they are going to accept it as an elective or whether they're going to accept it toward the major, I think is what we're talking about here. But that's a real-life example of a course that is taught probably more often at the lower division level, but still with a pretty good, I would say probably 30% being taught at upper division level as well. So there's enough there that four-year institutions were very antsy about that.
To also add of things for us to consider related to the field of study. If the field of study courses many times are not indicated as field of study on transcripts, and that would cause some issues. The other thing is I would hope that we would be looking at not just numbers and title of a course, but the student learning outcome for the course. And if the student learning objectives and outcomes at a four-year institution are different than what was offered in a two-year institution, I hope that would be also looked at.
Jacob, did you discuss that in your committee when you were working on the history field of study? referring back to the student learning outcomes for the course?
I'm looking at Rex, because Rex was in the room for those conversations. I don't believe that we did. I would have to go back through those 5-hour videos, but I don't believe that that came up.
Well, we'll just continue as we work through this list. Julie mentioned something about 5 already. Field of study course not aligned to curriculum of major, content integrated into multiple courses or not included in the degree program. So that seems to me referring to programs that have flexibility in how they're incorporating student learning outcomes across their curriculum at the upper division rather than just within one course at a time. Any thoughts on that one from the group? Is that what, am I getting that? Okay. Number 6, non-core and non-field of study course. A major or field of study requires different preparatory courses. So a reason why the course does not apply at the time of transfer, so it is neither a core curriculum course nor a field of study course. So it would not transfer, potentially would not transfer. Pretty clean on that one? Number 7, non-core, non-field of study course. Semester credit hour for elective courses are not accommodated in degree program plan minimum SCH required to graduation. We did talk about that in our work here about running up on the 120-hour semester credit hour, limit for the undergraduate degree. So or where approved above that number. Non-field of study course not aligned to curriculum of major content taught at upper division. So again, it's neither core nor field of study. It lies outside that field. And then finally, non-field of study course not aligned to curriculum of major content integrated into multiple courses. Just at face value, while we're here, and if anyone has something that's jumped out at them, I'm sure coordinating board staff would be interested if there's something else that you have considered at your institution that might be of value to share with our coordinating board colleagues today. Something that's been discussed on your campus, perhaps?
What does happen, like if a student is considering like a double major or minor? These don't necessarily address those cases? Because this is assuming a one undergraduate degree major scenario.
Good point.
The other thing I do want to add to the field of study conversation, that from a community college perspective, the current understanding is that what we're telling our students is that if they take part or in whole the field of study courses, that they will transfer to the university. So now I'm not sure if that is the case, and I'm a little bit cautious in proceeding to tell our students that if there's wiggle room in whether those courses will transfer, and then additionally clarification on transferability and differentiating that between whether a field of study course transfers or whether it applies towards the major degree plan. I think that really needs to be clear up front to our students so that we don't have them taking classes that the community colleges are saying, don't worry, the university will accept your field of study course, and then when they get there, it doesn't get accepted, and then they'll come back to us as, but you told us. So I think that needs to be cleared up, and there seems to be not a common understanding.
Rex? Please. He's going to go to the microphone.
You can sit up here.
And if you would, I'm sure our new members probably know you already, but just introduce yourself so they're aware.
Good morning. It is still morning, right?
Yes.
Good morning. I'm Rex Peebles. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Academic Quality and Workforce here at the Coordinating Board. And so it's that division that heads up things like transfer policy and core curriculum. And so the advice and counsel that we get from you guys is usually applicable to our division. And so that's why we have I don't know what you want to call it, oversight over the committee. Or that sounds a little strong, but that's the way it is. So fields of study. So what the law says is, and first of all, let's be clear that transfer is one thing, applying it to the major is something else. And so, and you know, the old saw is that everything transfers, but not everything applies. Well, not everything transfers, first of all, but you know, if you got a passing grade on it, it usually transfers, and then whether it gets applied to the degree or not is something else that gets worked out. So what the law says is that if a student finishes or successfully completes, so we sort of assume a C or better here, that they successfully complete a field of study courses, or the complete field of study, then those courses, or the complete field of study, upon transfer to another public institution in Texas, will be applied to that major in total, without an increase in total number of hours for the degree. Okay, that's the law. Now, what we know is that, as it's you know, ever how you want to look at it, fortunately or unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. And so part of the study that Senate Bill 25 is asking for is to, I mean, what we know is that and let me preface this a little bit with what we know in our transfer study work is that Native students actually graduate with a negative number of excess hours because they bring in AP and that kind of stuff. Transfer students graduate with a lot more than that. Depending on how you want to measure it, it's somewhere between 15 and 25. Students with dual credit, that's even more so. That adds another 6 hours to it. So the idea behind this legislation is to try to figure out, so we have all these students taking all these courses, and they transfer and they don't apply to a major, and so why not? And we also know that there are legitimate reasons why a course may not apply to a major, right? It may be because that major simply you took courses that simply are not a part of that major. So we know that there are legitimate reasons for it not applying, right? And so the whole idea here is to try to get a better handle on why do we have all of these excess hours? What's the cause of that? What are legitimate reasons, if you will, versus the ones that may not be quite so legitimate? And separate that out and then look at where we need to work on that stuff. And so some of these questions about fields of study, and what you see there is really sort of the internal work so far. We're going to get some feedback next week from institutions and so forth, and so that should help, you know, complete the picture, so to speak, if you will. And so none of this is finalized yet. But the idea behind asking the field of study questions is that is one of the two major pieces of statute. It is one of the two only pieces of statute that the legislature has ever passed regarding transfer in a big way. That core curriculum and field of study is the other. And so is that working or is it not working, and why or why not? And what we do know is that a lot of those reasons are the kind of reasons that we hear from institutions and that we hear from people, that these things are not being accepted, and here's why. So again, part of this is also to try to help separate anecdote from evidence. And so this is an attempt to actually gather some real evidence, and so that we can get past the anecdotes that we hear from time to time and actually get a real look at what is going on out there, or what is not going on out there, and why. And again, we all know that there's legitimate reasons for things not to apply to a degree. You know, the simplest being, you know, you got an F in it or you withdrew, on up to that course is simply not a part of the degree. And so we just want to try to figure out what those causes are, and that's why those are there. But anyway, that's what the statute on field of study says. And I think that part of this will also help going forward. My hope would be that the information derived from this will go to bodies like this, but will also be shared with the field of study committees to help identify where there's real issues and concerns and trouble spots that the committees then need to sit down and really talk through and address how to fix that, if you will, in one way or the other. By adding something to the field of study, deleting something from the field of study, revising what's already there, whatever the case may be. But hopefully that evidence will be used by them to help make better informed decisions about what those should look like.
I think that, issues surrounding field of study and whether the four-year university will accept what the working groups have decided and so forth, I feel like that should be worked out separately from this mechanism, because allowing item number 4 and 5 is a way for the universities to not accept the course.
No, it's not.
Well, it says
We're
reasons
asking-
why.
No, we're asking why they
apply.
don't do it. We're not telling them that this is okay, that this is legal, that this is
okay.
legitimate, that it's not okay, that it's not legitimate. There's no value judgment involved in the questions. We're just simply trying to get at why things are happening the way they're happening.
But if it is a canned answer, it sort of gives an implicit legalization. That's what I hear from the committee right now in their response. And so that may be not the best way to address getting the answer, because it looks like, oh, this is a choice, and so this is not what we're doing, but this is what we should do almost.
Well, I could see how one might read that into it, but you shouldn't, is all I can say to that. It's like a lot of other surveys where you could read into almost any question, any kind of value judgment you want to, but you probably shouldn't necessarily. And I think this is one of them. And the other is to keep in mind that the institutions, for the four-year institutions that are going to have to fill this report out, the ability to have some kind of, at least we think, and like I said, we'll get some feedback from four-year institutions and systems next week, hopefully, about this. But, our thought process on this was that anytime you're filling out a survey of sort, which is what this is, in a way, then having a drop-down menu with some choices to make, but also allowing you to add other, if none of this fits, then tell us something, would be there. So, it's a good suggestion. And maybe part of what needs to happen in sort of the preface to the survey that goes out is to make sure that we try to explain as carefully as we can exactly what the purpose of it is and why it's there and so forth. So that's point well taken. Thank you.
John.
I was just going to, if this is appropriate, I was going to suggest another item that could be added.
Perfect.
The item I would suggest is that it's a field of study course, but there was not a grade of, say, C or higher.
Explicitly point that out and define what that transferability expectation is.
Correct. So and I know in my institution, there are certain courses in the field of study that are field of study courses that in order to progress to the next course, you must get a grade of C or higher, otherwise our native students are not permitted to go on to the next course. And so that might be a reason that a four-year institution may not choose to apply a course to the major.
Very good point. Thank you. Other points in conversation? Yes.
Stephanie here. I agree with John. Also, thank you, Rex, for clarification and background. So it says here that these items on this list are under consideration as items or reasons for not transferring a certain, or not applying a certain course to a major, and that this is still under consideration. So how and by when could all of our institutions, because it seems like there's a little bit of non-transparency, how can we get our input in there?
Well, so each of the systems and the independent universities have, actually, they have a working group that's joined together, and my hope would be that and I think this is happening, that they are communicating with their institutions in some way or fashion about all of this, and so that the feedback that we get from them will reflect that, and I think it will. From what I understand about how this is going.
Is that the study that was asked for in item 9 of the SB 25? Is that the work group? Earlier, when we're talking about SB 25, there was an item that they were forming a study or a work group to look at these issues?
No, that's a different. That's
not section 1.
No, that's not this section.
Okay.
No. So this is a work group that was put together, as I understand it, by the systems and the independent.
Right.
When I say independent, I mean independent public institutions.
I understand. I know
by the way.
Texas,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay,
I
just
know
to make
about
sure
that one.
everybody understands.
Right.
And it was put together and formed by them to help to provide us with some feedback on this.
Okay, thanks.
Jacob.
One quick question. Having worked with the field of study in history, one concern that four-year institutions had over the course of those conversations was that A robust field of study would limit the number of upper division hours that a student could earn in a major. And so history constructed a relatively small field of study. It was 12 hours, 6 of which are in the core. So it's easy for us to count those hours. My concern is that many of the other fields of study committees did construct very robust fields of study that are in excess of 6 hours. Some of them are 12, 18-hour things. My question is how, it seems to me that this is very well and good to have reasons why those fields of study courses cannot count to a major, but one of them might simply be that the institution requires a certain level of upper division hours, and these are in excess of that. And I don't know how we vocalize that. I don't know how we say that. It's beyond saying that a course is taught at an upper division level. It's just saying that we cannot accept a 2,000 level course because 18 of our whatever number have to be upper division, and we cannot count. We have a limit on the number of lower division courses we can count. Is that possibly something that we can include as item, I guess we're up to item 11 now. A major requires X amount of, only permits a certain amount of, I guess the right way to say it, a major only permits a certain amount of lower division credit, and these lower division credits that are field of study are in excess of that number.
And I'd like to add to that, not just upper division within the major, but upper division requirements for the baccalaureate degree.
Yeah, yes.
So
yes.
Responses to that. So the general thought is that the implication of having, as you said, a more robust field of study with greater numbers of hours is that it essentially eliminates the opportunity to take, if it replaces an upper division course, to take the complement of upper division courses that would be required as defined by the department and faculty or by the university for the general degree.
Absolutely.
Okay.
My immediate thought, and I'm curious what other institutions do. So this happens with us. The example I know is mathematics. So differential equations is taught at the community college. At our institution, it's an upper division course. We will accept that course. We won't make them retake differential equations, but we'll just give a firm warning that, hey, you need to take an extra upper division course in something because you're not taking this at the 3,000 level. So in that case, the course actually does count toward the major, but there's a penalty. There's a hidden penalty to the student because they took it at the community college level, or the lower division level, wasn't I to say. So I'm just curious what the practice of other places are if that were to happen.
At A&M Corpus Christi, we do the same. We do
Microphone?
Oh, it is on.
Oh, thank you, Missy.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. We do the same at A&M Corpus Christi. We will accept transfer work at a lower division level for upper division credit on the degree plan, but they do not get the upper division credit for the hours. So the student will get credit on their degree plan, but that course is not being used to meet the university required upper division.
May I ask a clarifying question? Does that course then go into electives, or is it counted? It's not counted to the major.
It is counted in the major.
It
is counted in the major. However, we have some coding that will exclude it from counting towards our 45 upper division hour requirement.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. I think that issue comes up in every field of study committee, that this has been raised. And what I find sort of fascinating about the whole process is, in spite of that, of the 30 some odd, I think we've now done 31 fields of study, 18 of them have over 30 hours in them. And we had one the other day that they proposed 42. And Ella and I both kind of went, well, wait a minute. This is really getting out of hand now. For that very reason that, John, that you raised. And so I think that, and we were talking about this the other day, and I think one of the things that going forward that we're going to have to really get a better handle on, and I think that that this whole thing about another part of SB 25 asks for course sequences at the lower division level, and that should help us figure some of this out, is that is this whole notion of, well, how many upper division hours are required, and so you're not crowding this out, right? And that's the issue that you raised, and I think it's a legitimate issue. And so I'm still sometimes surprised at how many hours they come back with. in spite of. So it's a, and actually what you see though is by the way, in those where you tend to have the greater the number, they generally are reflective of the fact that in those disciplines, there's a greater number of lower division courses required for them, like engineering, for example, as opposed to history, which has a much more limited number of lower division hours required in history. So on some level, it makes a lot of sense, but it still sometimes surprises me that it's there. But I think it's one of those things that the field of study committees themselves, and remember, they're on a minimum of a 5-year review cycle, and we'll bring them back sooner if people want us to. We're bringing back a couple this year already as a result of requests from the fields. But that's another issue that probably needs to be more attention needs to be paid to going forward.
Well, I will speak from my perspective. I kind of jumped in my seat there when you talked about going up to 40 hours or more for a field of study, because unless there's substantial cross-tabbing with the core curriculum, we've now gone to potentially 80 hours of credit that the four-year institution has to accept, and that's beyond the expectations any of us have with respect to that. And so anything we can do to help clarify cross-fertilization between the core curriculum and the field of study where possible, and then maybe at some point establishing what would be a justifiable maximum number of hours for the field of study is something I think would be very helpful in the future as these committees return and others continue to work. Other points?
I'd like to add also to add on to that, take into consideration the residency requirement.
Yes.
That is, I think, when you're getting up to such a high number, you have to take into consideration that 25% of the degree must be taught at the degree awarding institution.
And eligibility for, this has come up, eligibility for academic honors and other things like that if a greater percentage of your degree is taken outside the rewarding institution. Other points? And again, I just want to bring that full. This was all under the component of new reporting requirements with the goal of developing tools for the four-year universities to use that would help streamline the reporting on the reasons why courses might not apply as field of study courses. It's not meant to define.
I have another point.
I don't
Yes.
mean to open up the can of-
Hold
I'm
on.
sorry.
All right. I was listening about the history program, and I was just wondering whether the coding should be the overriding criteria to determine the transferability of the course, or whether it is the learning outcome of the class. Because if a course is being offered at 200 level in one institution, and it is offered at 300 level in another, but the learning outcomes are the same, should the learning outcomes be the overarching consideration as to whether that course is transferable or not the coding of the course?
Yeah, and I would certainly hope so. And I think that, you know, one of my dreams about field of study committees is at some point they sort of get past talking about what they do as an institution and actually delve much deeper. And they get around to this. It takes them a half a day or more to do it. But at some point, what I would really like to see is really deep conversations about what's required at the lower division level to be successful at the upper division level. And then you can, and once you sort of figure out what that content is, then you can start talking about and how many courses that they're going to take to cover that content, and then what should be the appropriate learning outcomes from that. And you raise a little bit different issue to some extent. If you have the same learning outcomes at both, you know, at both levels, then which one should it be? And that, in the end, that may be a function of, well, how many hours do you have down here versus how many hours do you have here? And so, you know, part of it is that kind of give and take on both sides. But fields of study committees, and this is not anything I don't say to them up front, is that, you know, they tend to be, initially they all tend to be driven by preserving their own turf, so to speak. And this is true of both 2-year and 4-year institutions. Right? You know, so everybody's guilty, everybody's innocent. But once they start kind of get past some of that and really start talking about what's necessary for students to be successful, then they usually do some good work. And I think, frankly, I think that all of these things are something that's going to have to go through at least 2 rounds sort of settle some of those issues out that John, you raised and that you just raised as well. So.
Other points, yes.
Crystal Seahorn, University of Houston, Clear Lake. I'm thinking about what Veronique was saying earlier in terms of community colleges saying these will transfer and then they're not transferring. Is there any requirement to track institutional changes? So I can envision we get a lot of our students from Lee, us making changes, and we're already talking about the areas that we might need to make those changes. But if we're recording this initial round of these didn't count, and then we make that distinction, is there a requirement that we also say we made this change and now these fewer courses are being counted that weren't prior?
I don't think so. And here's why. Because this is an annual report. This is not a one-time only. And so I think what you would expect then is that if you see changes, it's because of something that happened back there. Now, there may be, we haven't really thought about trying to document the changes. I mean, I think getting through this first round is, 'cause I was telling other people about this. I said, look, here's the deal. The institutions have all this information, but it's not necessarily readily available to them. But somewhere, somebody knows why a course wasn't applied to a degree. Now, it may be on a Post-it note in some kid's file somewhere, or it may have made its way into the system. Sometimes this stuff doesn't make its way into the system until the student asks for it, says, look, I want to graduate, and you run a degree audit, right? So it's not something that is, at every institution at least, is always formally captured. And so we know that this is going to be somewhat of a lift. And we've also talked about the notion that the first year of data on this probably ought to be taken with the same degree of veracity that you would take any first year of data, and that is that there's probably going to be problems with it that need to be worked out, and so on. But it is a multi-year thing, and so we would sort of expect to see that show up over time.
Jacob?
I hate to beat a dead horse. I suppose one could say I'm tenacious or stubborn. But I do want to come back to this idea of, I do wonder if it's not good to have another reason on here. I guess we've done 9 reasons, and then the 10th reason is field of study course, the student didn't receive a C or better. An 11th reason that simply says that the hours, the lower division hours, are in excess of the institution's maximum requirement of lower division hours for the major. I think that's we've talked about it, but I don't think we've necessarily said that that's a bad thing. And I think we need to, I would be very much in favor of having some language here so that an institution could say that these are wonderful, but they cannot count to the major because the major only allows for X amount of lower division hours.
Well, and I think one of the things I would go back to as I began this conversation is the opportunity for confusion between major and degree. 2 very different definitions at the 4-year and the 2-year, but because the major is that defined subset of the degree. The degree is the totality of the hours needed to complete the baccalaureate with all the other requirements there too. So I do think there is some, at least if it didn't make this list in the early years, making sure that's something that's a consideration for current and future field of study working groups, is because I'm not sure, that's another thing, and for those of you who are new to the committee, when we had our conversations about this last January, I think it was, wasn't it, Reinhold? Where we talked about these kinds of issues, field of study, core curriculum. One of the things we really talked about as well was sometimes the lack of 2-year to 4-year, we don't know what our neighbors are doing as we might otherwise, and I think that's one example. And I think hopefully we'll all learn more as this continues. Other points, I think we've given some nice feedback for the first section, but this is only the first section. And I'd like to give coordinating board staff an opportunity to continue as we proceed. So if you'll bear with me, we'll continue. John, did you have something you wanted to add?
My question was the scope of what's expected. Are we going to do this only for the students that are starting to transfer now, or do we have to do this for students that currently are with us now, and we have to dig up those old Post-it notes as to why people made those decisions?
I'll defer to coordinating board staff for an answer on that one.
There we have to go to the statute. I don't know.
The question is, essentially, when this report is completed, it's referred to as an example, the transfer class of fall 2019, and so the report would reflect the transferability of courses they presented for that, at that academic year, or will this report also need to be looking back to previous academic years?
Where we're at right now is that it would be, in the semester that a student transfers in probably the fall semester, since that's when most transfers come in. And so the report, what we're thinking right now is the report would revolve around everybody transferred in that semester. And then like the next year would be everybody transferred in that semester. Yeah, instead of, trying to backtrack. Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
I understand why, too, yeah.
Okay, Reinhold, do you want to continue with the different sections of the legislation?
All right. So the Section 2 pertains to the Texas Common Admission application, and there is an idea basically, if a student applies to one institution for a certain major and does not get accepted into that major, that institution may well forward the application to other institutions where that student may have the opportunity to be accepted into that major. So it would ease the process of finding an alternative, and maybe not for a student to go to institution and change the major because of the reason that the student did not get the desired major. But that transfer of application would require permission by the student to do that. And that is, so there are two steps in a way I see it for this. The common application process needs to offer that option, and that's coding work involved. And then how it is done, that the application is forwarded to other institutions, is another step. And that is, for that, there's the Applied Text Advisory Committee who wrangles with that. So this is something that has to be implemented, but we, i.e. UEAC, you don't really have to deal with it as far as I can see. Then the next section of the bill, which requires action, as Section 4, filing a decree plan. And that requires changing rules because there was already filing of decree plans before. Just when that was done has changed. And so there will be negotiated rulemaking about that. And actually, that work will start next week with the negotiated rulemaking committee. And what they come forward with then will be publicly posted as a rule change and goes to the board. If you're interested in that work and how it starts out, there is a suggested strawman rule change posted, so you can go to our webpage and go to negotiated rulemaking page, and I show you how to do that best, and you can find both the materials and also the committee which works with us. The work itself is not, as far as I know or understand, is not online for negotiated rulemaking. It's not broadcast. But so I will come back to you and tell you about the outcome. Then Section 5 is about posting and showing recommended course sequences, at least one course sequence for each program an institution has. And we all know that institutions do this, but they do this in very different forms. You just have to go to institutions' catalogs, and you see it's very all over the place how that is done. There will also be a round of negotiated rulemaking, but that has not been scheduled yet. That will start in January, I was told. So that will be its own work. So if you're interested in that, please follow the Gov Delivery notes when they call for that negotiated rulemaking committee. And the last thing which has to be done is Section 9, and that is the study and report on the core curriculum. And so that will form a new, for that, there will be formed a new committee, and it's not, so as somebody pointed out, it's not the UEAC. It's a statutory committee because it's in statute, and they will study the charge of Section 9, and then they will start in October. So the committee has been set up, and they will start in October. They will have quarterly reports and a final recommendation by November of next year. And so that is where the interest of our group comes in, that we stay abreast with what the quarterly reports are and what they think about this. And so I'm personally not involved with this, but I will certainly get whatever information I can and bring that towards you. The committee itself has been selected, and that's also on the negotiated rulemaking page. It's there, even though they don't make rules, but they're set up as negotiated rulemaking procedure. They don't do rules, but they make the recommendation. And a couple people on the committee are former UEAC members, and there may be even one or some who are current, so you can go there. So we certainly will have an interest in that. And I envision then that you study what they come up with in their study and give the input to that, you know, what you think about it. And that's really, so from the long bill, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 action items, if you will.
Any questions about our conversation and the information that was shared regarding sections 2, 4, 5, and 9? Yes.
A comment on Section 5 regarding the timeline. If April 2020 is when the rules will be considered for adoption and we're expected to begin reporting and publishing in fall 2020, if that expectation is for catalogs, it's going to be very challenging.
Well, it's the reporting of course sequences is really parallel to catalogs. It's not reported necessarily in your catalog, but it comes. The information is driven by your catalog in a way. So the way I understand it, it's not that you change your catalogs. It's that you pull the information out of the catalog and make it digestible in the forms that these rules will specify.
I think even with that, though, I think a concern, if I can just follow up on that, Veronique, is that most institutions will have completed their curriculum process for the subsequent academic year by the time that is going to be approved in April of 2020. Just something, I know this is already appears to be moving forward, but that's because it was defined. That's going to be a challenge for us because we're already advising and registering new students for the subsequent fall based upon that approval of the curriculum committee for changes for the subsequent academic year.
I know that our institution, I don't believe we actually have the four-year plans are actually in the catalog itself. Those are in other documents. And so if I understand the statute says that the four-year plans must appear in the course catalog. And so we've got some work to do to get that to happen by fall 2020.
Thank you, John. Other points?
That's an important point. That's sort of the tiny things which don't necessarily jump out on you if you don't think them. Thank you.
Other perspectives, anything to share about sections 2, 4, 5, and 9? Okay, you have something you want to share?
I don't want to open a can of worms,
That's okay.
but I keep looking at this, and I can't help but think that if we had a common course numbering system, that would solve some of these issues. And I know that's a question that's not on here, but my mind keeps coming back to that.
Well, we do.
I think you're actually asking for more than just having a common course numbering system.
I think what you're asking for is that schools respect it and adopt it.
Just saying. I think you may be right in that.
Just a comment, because all the real work happens, in my opinion, like all the exceptions and things we have about your history and then the other over here, then we have advisors that are not wanting to advise students to take additional courses. They'd want to know that information about the history, so they may not be a field of study complete, but we're going to advise them into the right coursework that they need so that they don't have those extra hours, as Rex mentioned earlier. And obviously that field of study just makes it easier for those folks to do a better job of advising those students. And that's and that's my opinion from a holistic approach, because those advisors, they know those caveats that we won't take this because in the prerequisite, then they're going to work with them to give them that. It certainly would be easier for the students. They try to navigate their paths, that we have some of that consistency and that compliance with it on that.
And I'm really excited. I hope when you think about that situation itself, the reverse transcripting component that helps then the community college achieve their performance measure is going to be an important part of that. So you get the credit for the degree completion when the student has completed those hours as well. Other questions, perspectives, or points to be shared with the group? Okay, it is 11:25. Do we want to continue?
I think so. Lunch is here, but I would like to continue because it's really...
We're making good time.
In this agenda item 5, so because now we're getting back to what our, well, mine and yours, I assume, real immediate concerns are, because we have, so if you look on the first page of agenda item 5, it says updates on the parts of Senate Bill 25. We slogged through that. And then it says, and there is no materials to that, update on first-year foreign language courses, and in the core curriculum, it should say. So that is something which we have dealt with before many times, but we have not done resolutions to it. And so let me reiterate what happened, especially for the new members, with the core curriculum. So the core curriculum are 42 semester credit hours, and they're divided in 8 different foundation component areas and the component area option, so 9 sections. And there exist definitions for all these FCAs, foundational component areas. And there are also 6 core objectives, which are skills, learning skills, like communication, critical thinking, teamwork, etc., which are distributed over these foundation component areas according where it makes more sense that they are taught, and then in the end, they have to be assessed in there. So we have, and all these courses for each institution are approved by the coordinating board according to these definitions of FCAs and according to the definitions of the core objectives. And so we have, and that all started as a new core curriculum in 2014. And I like to say there are 10,000 courses in there, so that's a big number. And so we started all this, we jumped right in, and then we found that certain courses were not aligned with these definitions. And one set of courses were skills courses for the individuals, and that as playing music, guitar courses, piano courses, or courses that teach you how to draw. And we have struggled with that a lot, but in the end, these courses are not in the core curriculum anymore, because core curriculum courses are supposed to be general academic courses that prepare students in their nature for all future academic learning. Then we had, so that topic is really closed or dealt with, if you will. But we had also the language courses, and there are different kinds of language courses. There are introductory language courses, there are intermediate and advanced language courses, and some of those we also have in the core curriculum. Besides that, there may be other courses of special interest to the institution that are not necessarily aligned with those definitions of the FCA, but especially the introductory language courses are what is contended, because they teach introductory language skills, learning words, learning grammar. They don't teach appreciation and culture and those things as their main focus. But representatives here and representatives from institutions all over the state tell me they are very important and they should be in the core. We think they should not be in the core, but we have left them in the core as they are. We have not approved any more of those. But the UEAC has dealt with the issue in April, I think, of last year. No, I forget when it was. Came up with maybe a solution to it by changing parts of the rules for the core curriculum. So not changing the statute, changing the rules. We held this in place because the legislator did work on the core, and we were hoping that they may help us or do something about it, or maybe not hoping, seeing what they would do. Turns out nothing in Senate Bill 25 addresses that issue. So we're back to that issue on our own. And the main idea that UEAC put forward in this rule change is that the core curriculum in Texas is rather large. It has 42 semester credit hours. And 36 of those are tied to the defined foundational component areas directly, and 6 in the component area option are tied to the foundational component areas, but all sorts of courses can go into that component area option. And if the rules would allow different flexibility for the component area option, that is the 6 semester credit hours in them, then maybe courses like introductory courses could be added to them as opportunity for the students and for the needs of the students, including other courses that may be of special interest. And what limits that right now is that courses are tied to the definitions of the FCA, and also there are 2 parts in the component area option. We call them option A and option B, which require that at least 3 hours are taken in option A. So if you change option B or put something in option B, that doesn't allow for course sequences like introductory language, semester A and semester B. So that was the change which was worked on. And basically it says leave option A as it is. So a student may take up to 6 hours in option A, and courses may be put by the institution in there. Some institutions put a lot of courses in there, some only a few they want their students to take. That is up to them. But actually UEAC specified that students then shouldn't mix and match the FCA course listed, with the CAO. So they only can take what's listed in the CAO option A, but they can take 0 to 6 hours in there. So basically, a student could take another speech course or another history course or another math course. You know, if a student takes Calculus 1 in the FCA and wants to take Calculus 2, well, the math FCA is completed. The student could take Calculus 2 in the option A. It's just another math course and gets core credit for it. So that allows then the overlap of FOS and core curriculum. Now, for option B, you suggested to loosen the restriction of the FCA definition and allow up to 6 hours to be taken in it. So there are two changes. Right now, you can take up to 3 hours in the option B, and the course really has to also be aligned with the FCA, but it would loosen that strict interpretation and would allow 6 hours in it, so a student could take Intro to Spanish 1, Intro to Spanish 2. The only limitation is that an institution would have to declare why these courses are in there, that they are of special interest to their students. Otherwise, you felt like, and I agree, the whole catalog would be in that option B. So you could justify the purpose why this is part of general education, if you will, but in a looser sense. And that is the long summary. I hope that was clear. I don't know, especially for the new members. The ones who were here, they know. But so I reprinted the rules on that page after the statute. On the upper part of the page is the current rule, and lower part is the suggested rule. And your chairs can go through that with you again. Basically, our question is, since Senate Bill 25 did not address that, since we have these, we want to have resolution on these courses, would you like to go us forward with negotiated rulemaking? Since we know all core, matters core has to be negotiated rulemaking. So if you still like this, then we form a committee for negotiated rulemaking. This would be the straw man for the new rules, and they would discuss it and then put forward a rule change.
One point as we begin, I think I would disagree with only one statement at this point in what you shared, and that is I don't think we were in agreement with respect to the number of hours. I think there was serious disagreement among members with whether we remained at 42 or reduced to 36. I remember that it was a pretty obvious indirect assessment when we broke up for our groups to discuss the core.
Oh, I didn't address that, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to address.
Oh,
So another issue we had, and that is actually a good point to bring up. So the UEAC wrestled with us. You could just also say, reduce the core by 6 hours and be done with it. And then have 36 hours and eliminate the component area option. And as you reported to the board, the UEAC was not united on this. There were good reasons for either or. And so the UEAC didn't even try to go and come to a resolution. And our commissioner actually was interested and came to the summary of that discussion. And so then the legislator did not go there, to put it that way. So they did not touch reducing it, even though that was on the table way back when it all started. So we are here with the situation that we have the 42 semester credit core, and that did not change.
Yeah. Perspectives from the group. I believe the question is whether the UEAC is in favor of proceeding with the thought that negotiated rulemaking could begin, that process could begin. Are there perspectives on that?
My comment is, since Section 9 of the SB 25 has a negotiated rulemaking that's studying reporting on the core curriculum, could we forward this recommendation of the UEAC to that committee to consider as they're conducting their study?
Jacob?
I think I was thinking the same thing. They already have an existing structure, and this seems like it would come right into their bailiwick.
They do have a structure. We have to look at the bill then, what I printed. They have a fairly confined, restricted charge to look at the meta majors and how that is built into, or could be built into the core. Now, we would have to look at this. I don't know if that, well, and they make a recommendation next year. They will not make the rule change. So yes, that is the question, I guess, in that sense. Do you want UEAC's idea to go forward? And that would be implemented. So the timeline would be for this negotiated rulemaking takes about half a year, and the change for the component area option would then be effective for next fall. And so the changes for the core could then be built in. If we go over the study, then it will be a little delayed more.
And I would add to that, not only the work of the committee, but we also have a new commissioner arriving. Do we have a sense as to what the new commissioner's perspective on the core curriculum might be? And whether we want to allow the committee that's already established, that's going to be considering some of what we've discussed, that begins their work this fall, to continue and then re-examine this issue later.
I have a question, and I may be overthinking it, but as this study group is coming together, are they also going to be considering the language about the articulation agreements on page 7 of the statute in section E that says that no more than 60 credits will be transferred, so that needs to always be considered as well? If the articulation agreements are limited to 60 credits, wouldn't it behoove us to make sure that all the structures in place work within that?
Because they talk about the 42 semester credit hours of the core.
Mm-hmm.
But they also talk about field of study.
I'm looking, I can't answer that question for you about, I think we defer to coordinating board staff at that point, that they are more narrowly defined to be looking at the 42-hour core. The group that has been appointed that will begin meeting this fall. Well, my question, though, would be, I'm using my doctorates in agriculture, so I'll use the wonderful cart before the horse. If we have a negotiated rulemaking committee on the core curriculum study and report that's beginning work this fall, should that group complete its work before another negotiated rulemaking committee would begin trying to make definition? Horse and cart.
Well, what could happen is that, you know, if you change the rules through this initiative, or not, you know, if the rules are changed in the end through this, that work may be out the window again if other ideas come up with splitting the core. I don't know. I mean, if you split the core, then you have new rules.
Yeah, I think if a possibility that the component area option may not exist, you know, then we may just want to wait and have those recommendations first, see what it is, and then see then how we want to act from there.
What's the deadline for? What was the deadline for their work? I saw it was here somewhere.
November, they make recommendations November 1st next year.
Okay.
December 1 of 2020, the report.
Okay.
So remember, that's a statute, that's a recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see if we get it.
That's a tight timeline. John?
I would be in favor of go ahead and proceeding with the rulemaking process for the following reason. This committee will present its recommendation till November 1st, but the recommendation doesn't mean anything actually happens. And then the next legislature in 2021 would then take that report and presumably do something with it. I would guess that would not be taking effect until 2022 or 23 possibly. So all this to say, there's a good chance that for the next 3 or 4 years, this would actually be effective. It wouldn't be superseded right away. We were on the committee that decided, the UEAC, a couple of years ago when we did this. I think everybody back then anyway thought it was a good idea. And if there's a chance that this is going to be a good idea for 3 or 4 years, I'd encourage us to go ahead and do that, even if that might be superseded 3 or 4 years from now.
Other perspectives? How would you like us to proceed? And I also need a reminder to our friends on the phone as well, if you have perspectives you'd like to share. We had a comment from here.
It just seemed like we didn't get to a point of really consensus as how to approach it. As you referenced a little earlier, there was quite a bit of differences on how we should approach that. And I know at what point you invoked a straw man. Should you be a little bit further along in having some of that flushed out, that there's a consensus to being able to give them better guidance? Because even in this room, we were, not say divided, but there was obviously different opinions of how to approach that, and not have to dig back to the notes to do that. But that would be my concern, giving them a task that they develop something, and then when we get to the implementation stage of it, there'd be some challenges that we hadn't flushed out.
John?
For my part, I don't think the choice of going down to 36 is even on the table. That's not on statutes. That was an idea that we were deliberating to recommend to the legislature at that time, but that's no longer a consideration anymore. So, yeah, I agree there was disagreement in the room back in January about this and so on, but at this point, I think that's pretty much settled, at least for the time being, that the core is the core, 42 hours. And that's not debatable at this point.
I would go back to one more time. As we began that conversation last January in our groups, one of the points that we discussed at that point as well was that the leadership of the coordinating board, I believe, had entertained the concept of going from 42 to 36. Is that accurately stated? Rex, yes?
Yes, and so that was discussed internally about whether to remain at 42 or go to 36. Ultimately, the commissioner made the decision to not broach that subject. And then in the course of the legislative session, it never really came up about reducing it from 42 to 36. All of the discussion quickly focused around this idea of splitting the core into a 24-18 or 36-12 kind of split, and then using that 18 or 12 as some kind of meta major thing. And since there was never any agreement between 4- and 2-year institutions reached on that idea, then the result is we have the study and recommendations from that group going forward. But I think it's a good point that what that advisory committee is charged to do is come up with a set of recommendations that will then be reported to the board and to the legislature. And who knows what will happen with it at that point, or when it will happen.
Other points? Do we have a sense as to the incoming commissioner's perspective on this? No, not yet? Okay. Other thoughts? Well, I would ask Courtney, what action would you like from us as the UEAC at this point?
Well, I would like to know how to go forward.
Okay,
do we do it or don't? Do it England or don't?
Can you review again the timeline for this, if we do proceed with the rulemaking for this core curriculum change?
So it would start with setting up negotiated rulemaking, which can happen very quickly. And that process, I think, takes half a year because the committee has to be established and they have to discuss it. So this would be the straw man for the committee. They would discuss it and come up with recommended rule changes. Once they're done, it will be posted for the needed time, several weeks for public comments before it goes to the board meeting. So that could be probably the April board meeting. I'm not sure. Maybe June, but this academic year, it would go to the board.
Just one more time for our guests on the phone, if they have something they'd like to add? Understandable, yes.
Stephanie here, just one more time for clarification. Can you say what we are deciding to do or not do?
I think the questions being asked is the UEAC in favor of proceeding with negotiated rulemaking that would reflect and ask for consideration of the UEAC proposed rule as stated on, and there is not a page number, but it's immediately following the legislation, the copy of the bill. Am I stating that appropriately for you, Reinhold?
Right.
So essentially, the negotiating rulemaking committee would be formed and then would establish a calendar for actions and would consider this proposed rule, this change to the core curriculum as stated, and again, not a page number, but it's stated in your packet. Is everyone in agreement that that's what we're discussing? If we're ready, again, we would have to have a motion regarding whether or not we wish to proceed as UEAC with the decision to ask that negotiating rulemaking in favor of this proposed rule change would begin.
Before we, this is Dave speaking now. Before we move forward with that, can we talk more about what will be the benefits, the pros or cons about reducing the core?
Here in the room, one of the things that's coming up, again, the action to be considered in this negotiating rulemaking process would not include reducing the core from 42 to 36. It would merely restate the definitions, essentially, for the component area option 090. So it doesn't reduce the core. If the negotiated rulemaking committee proceeds with the UEAC's approval, it would not redefine the number of hours in the core. It would redefine how hours are articulated to 090, the component area option.
Okay.
Does that help? Thank you.
Yes.
Chair would entertain a motion.
I agree with John, so I'm going to make a motion to develop the negotiated rulemaking group.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor that the UEAC believes it is time to proceed with negotiated rulemaking in support of the proposed rule from the April 28th meeting, which reads, we discussed it earlier, I think it's important to go over it again, that the component area option is what's impacted, is redefined as stated in the materials you have. Do we have a second to the motion?
I second the motion.
We have a second from Texas Women's. Further discussion? A quiet group today. Further discussion? Seeing none, if we're ready to, and remember, I want our friends on the phone to join us as we consider this. I will ask for a vote by voice. All those in favor of proceeding to negotiated rulemaking as described, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay.
Aye.
We have 2 nays, I see. Yes. Any abstentions on this decision?
I'm sorry, who were the 2 nays? Okay,
Lee and Texas State.
thank you.
On the phone was, oh, no.
The phones, I think, were all, any abstentions? Abstain? Frank from McLennan. Okay, so the motion carries. Break for lunch? After a very busy and very productive morning, for those of you who are joining the coordinating board staff for lunch, please do so. We'll reconvene at what time, Reinhold?
Maybe half an hour?
12:25, 12:30.
12:30.
Okay? Thank you all.
Okay, I was just reminded that we have 5 more minutes for lunch. We'll be starting up at 12:35. We pushed it back five minutes, so.
It's 12:35, and so we will reconvene our meeting today. Are the folks on the phone with us?
Yes, Reese is here.
Okay.
Terry's here.
Yes. Jose Rojas is here.
Thank you. Dan Brown had to leave for another appointment, and so I'll chair the rest of the meeting. We are at agenda item number 6, discussion and consideration of marketable skills initiatives.
No, we still have 5.
I'm sorry.
We have, we do have one item left under 5. So we finished the core curriculum rules, and this is really only an informational item.
Okay.
So your committee has dealt a lot with the core curriculum. In fact, the UEAC years back established the new core curriculum. They worked it all out. The field of study committees are sort of separate, but we all know from the discussion they overlap. So I was interested in what courses were pulled into the field of studies that are also core curriculum courses and what courses are not core curriculum courses, and both are needed for the field of study, but what is what. And the way I went to my colleague Alan Michi, and I got the information and I compared it to the core curriculum. And so these are listing of all the courses there in the field of studies we have now by the rubric of the ACGM, the TCCNS. If an institution, four-year institution, has different numbering system, but declare the course equivalent to a TCCNS course, then they're included. And so on the left-hand side, you see the rubric and number, then you see the title as it is in the ACGM, the Academic Course Guide Manual. Then you see which field of study utilizes that course. Then the next column you see, does it occur in the core curriculum? If yes, then in what foundation component area? And then you see how often does that happen for two-year institutions and four-year institutions. So a four-year institution may have a similar course but not declared equivalent in the core curriculum as a ACGM course, then it's not listed here. So there may be courses, but they don't make the equivalency. Also, some courses are italicized. That just means there exist different versions. 4 semester credit hour versions, 3 semester credit hours, 3+1 versions, and they were all added together for this purpose, to get a handle on it. So basically, it goes down by the rubric, and some courses are only in one field of study, and there are only a few courses that are there in the core curriculum. But some have several field of studies, and they may appear under different foundation component areas in the core, and all that, hopefully, maybe, we think is perfectly legit, because they can attack the same issue in different ways. So this is that, and I don't know what more to say about it, except that it's probably something good to look at for planning purposes and so on.
Are there any questions, comments? If not, then we'll move on to agenda item number 6. Discussion and consideration of marketable skills and initiatives.
Oh, yes.
Could I ask a real quick question, a follow-up question from the last? Just dawned on my mind. You were talking about this new core committee that's being formed in response to the legislation that's going to look at the core. What is their relationship with UEAC? They're going to present their findings directly to the board. Will they present them to this body? In the past, this body has been actively involved with the core, so I'm just curious what the relationship is now.
Their purpose is to do the study of the meta majors and splitting the core and the effectiveness of that, or the potential effectiveness of that. And they will give a report at the end, so I assume it's a written report. Now, the statute says they have to do quarterly progress reports, and so that will be of interest to us. So I will get those quarter reports when they come out, and I will give them to you. And then UEAC can look at that. And if UEAC has input to that, we will collect that, and I give that to leadership can give it to that committee. So if there is needed communication, that works that way.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay. Agenda item 6. Discussion and consideration of marketable skills and initiatives.
So Yeah, marketable skills are part of 60 by 30 text, one of the big component. And so I thought, and there was interest by some members to learn more about it. And you have done some work in that before as well. So it would be important to keep that up. And so I put a couple things together which may be of interest, and also for considering for future work where you may want to go with that. So the first document in the materials is a coding board document, Marketable Skills Goal Implementation Guidelines. And actually, a couple years ago, or time flies, maybe only 1 year ago, I gave you that already, but it's a new version. So it's worthwhile to have it. And I still think it's a good overview of what marketable skills are supposed to do, and also what some of the resources are. Besides that, I did not think that you need to discuss that particular issue very much. It's just an informational item. The same as the next document, which is actually a document from the UEAC work group in January 2018. And so at the time, UEAC decided to come together, or several people came together, form a work group and discuss what kind of marketable skills could there be, and how to document them, and how to update them. So it was a general discussion how to deal with this and what are the marketable skills, how to get at them. And I reprint this also as information to use for those who haven't seen it before. And then we have so what we need to say is that much of the work with the marketable skills is actually done by the institutions. They have to find them and implement them and post them. And it's not something that is being assessed by the coding board. It's looked at. And that was always an emphasis. But we have the accessibility system, which has the name accessibility system, and that's the tool by which we look at it. So this year, there were questions in the accountability, well, it's accountability system, sorry, accountability. And this year there were questions in there which institutions were free to ask, and as a rollout, and next year institutions will ask them. And so this year is sort of the pilot of the accountability system. And so I went to the accountability folks and asked for the questions which were in there, because you may not see them otherwise, because it's for the reporting officials. And so there were basically 4 questions, and they're printed on this page before the slideshow. So the first question was basically, has your institution created and implemented such a process for marketable skills? And 3 simple answers: yes, no, it has been created but not implemented, and no, it has neither been created nor implemented. And then if institutions have implemented something by now already, they were asked to describe what it is. Then there was a question about the programs with identified marketable skills and the total number of programs. So it's a fairly easy survey, and my understanding in next year it will be pretty much the same, although there may be some changes or additional questions. So, because this was the pilot. And to look at what came out of that, we have a slideshow for you, and I asked Dr. Peoples to talk about that slideshow. So we have to get
So as Dr. Cornelius pointed out, in the accountability system for 2 years now, we've asked about this. And this last go-around, we actually asked about the progress that institutions were making. And just to remind you, the goal itself is for all programs, and we always meant by that instructional programs. Now, we understand that career services units, that kind of thing, are engaged in this same work. But the goal itself asks for instructional programs to identify marketable skills and then somehow make them known to their students, okay? And so this is what we've asked for progress on, and you just saw the questions that were asked in the accountability system for this. And we do intend, as of right now, we intend to use sort of the same method next year because it seems to be an easy way to get the information. It's easy for institutions to put the information into an existing system that's already there. And even though it's not sort of like the numbers that your reporting officials are used to loading into the accountability system, it still works. But it just has a little bit of narrative attached to it. And so we asked the questions about this. And again, the goal itself is that by 2020, all of this work will be done. And there's, like I said, there's really two pieces to it. One is have your instructional programs identified and all of their marketable skills. What's your process for doing so? And then what's your plan for revising these things going into the future? And as you can see, our progress so far is somewhat interesting. Let me say one quick word about, go back a second, on this one, that the last goal down there, it talks about the 80%. One of the targets we chose for this is that people were employed. So, the idea being that if you're actually getting marketable skills, then that should get you employed and you should stay employed and that kind of stuff. And actually employment post-secondary education has been at 80% for quite some time now. And so we sort of picked this target of 80% as a maintenance goal itself. And the idea being that if we actually see that going down, and it goes down at least in a way that's statistically significant, then there's something going on that we need to investigate. Okay, so our progress thus far on this, and go ahead and go to that next one. So this is for all institutions, and you'll notice the categories there, and this is the question, have you created and implemented the process yet? And so 23% have not implemented. So 41% have created and implemented, which is really pretty respectable considering that, by the way, this is information that was put into the accountability system in December, January of last year. So it doesn't really tell us anything about where institutions have gotten to in the last 6 to 9 months. But as of the reporting period of last December, January, we had 41% had created the marketable skills and or created their process rather, and had implemented their marketable skills or implemented the process. And then 23% said they'd been created, have not been created or implemented. Some have created the process but not implemented. That was 17%. And so in a lot of ways, that's 58% that have actually made significant progress. But we had 23% who said they have not created or implemented, and then 19% did not respond. And frankly, we took the did not respond as, no, we haven't done anything. Okay, so now that may or may not be correct, but my guess is it's probably more correct than it is wrong. So, because that's probably what I would have done in that position. Okay. But, for us, what that tells us about is that, if you add those two things together, 19 and 23 is, whatever that is, 41? 41? Or whatever that number is, 41, I think. Okay. No, that's not right. 42. Yeah, okay. Well, that was close. Okay. And when you're dealing with percentages, you can always round up or down. So anyway, okay. So, but that still tells us that there's a significant part or number of our institutions out there that don't seem to be very far along on this. So we're going to launch a couple of efforts to reach out to institutions and try to see where they may need some help, and then we'll try to provide them with that. But that was all institutions. The next slide just tells you what the four-year institutions are at. And so you can tell the numbers are not remarkably different from the all institutions for four-year institutions. So, but again, 41% have done it, but 27% has created but not implemented. And you actually have a little bit smaller percentage here of that did not respond and so forth. So again, it's just a question of looking at it and seeing whether people need some help with getting there or not. And then the next slide is community colleges and the Lamar Institute, which are also two-year institutions. And so we looked at them, and you can tell, again, the percentages are not remarkably different from what they were for all institutions. But we still have a significant number, 46% in this case, that said they either did not, they either did not respond or they haven't created or implemented. So no matter how you look at it, we have a significant number of institutions that need some help with this. And then the last slide is just a slide on this 80%. And as you can see, this has been relatively the same since 2000. I think we go back to 14, right? So back to 14. And that is, by the way, that's either employed or enrolled in graduate school, okay, or further education. Doesn't necessarily have to be graduate school, but further education. So either one of those counts in that 80%. Okay? And then there's also some information in here about the available supports that we have, and Rhino provided you with a copy of the implementation guidelines there in your packet. We also have a career readiness handbook that was put together by Dr. Torrey, who's sitting to my left. And while that handbook is actually geared toward graduating high school seniors and sort of incoming freshmen, it also talks about marketable skills and how they need to start paying attention to what kind of marketable skills are they getting in the course of their college career so that they know this stuff when they get out. There's also an internship toolkit that has been created for people to look at. Some of you may know that one of the pieces of legislation that passed this time around was to create the Texas Works, is what we're calling it. And it's a program where the state will match an employer's money to set up an internship program, a paid internship program, by the way, for students. And of course, as you all know, I mean, I'm sure that many of you in the room have been involved in internships in one way or another over the course of your careers, and you know that that's done correctly or done well, that can provide students with a lot of really great hands-on application of what they're learning in the program that they're in. So we're trying to support that some more. And we also have in the October, it was just passed at the cause meeting, and at the October board meeting, we'll seek permission to set up yet another advisory committee because we just can't get enough advice. And this one is on marketable skills. And this one's going to be a little different because this will actually focus on bringing in folks from business and industry. And whenever I say business and industry, I also mean the public sector in this too. So this would not just include sort of what we traditionally think of as business and industry, but it would also include folks working, for cities and counties in the state, the public sector, and also the nonprofit sector as well. But to bring people in that broad spectrum of business and industry and actually talk to them about marketable skills and what they mean. It's always struck me as how difficult this can be. One of the things that we encountered is that if you ask business and industry about marketable skills, what do they tell you? They want people that can communicate, that can critically think, solve problems, and play nice together. All right? And even work in a team if that's required. And beyond that, it's very difficult to get them to actually talk about what kind of marketable skills they really want. And there's also the translation problem. All of us in higher education are used to putting this all in terms of student learning outcomes. That's how we define what a student is supposed to learn, what they have learned, and so on. And business and industry oftentimes uses a different nomenclature to talk about the same thing. So the marketable skills goal was always had embedded in it this notion that institutions have always been teaching students marketable skills, and that students have actually been learning some of them as well. It's just that it's not clear from student learning outcomes what the student has learned, or there's a lot of things learned in the course of a degree that are not made explicit by the program itself. I always tell people that, you know, as a political scientist, I learned a lot of statistics at one time. I don't know that I could do much of that anymore, but at one time I learned a lot about statistics, and one of the jobs I had working my way through college was at a plastics plant. And the statistics that I learned in a political science program was easily translatable into quality control at the plant. You know, you got to know how to select your sample, do the analysis, draw the inferences from it, and so on. So, nobody in a bachelor's, master's, and doctoral program in political science ever told me that all that stuff I was learning about statistics could actually be applied to something other than political science. Now, you know that, you know, you sort of figure this out as you go along, but nobody ever tells you that, and nobody ever talks about the wide variety of things that people can do. So, you know, in a nutshell, or maybe that was maybe 2 nutshells worth, that's the marketable skills goal, and that's how we're going to try to track it going forward. And as Rhino pointed out earlier, we don't really anticipate, we may tweak the questions a little bit in the coming year, but we're basically going to use the same questions to track this as we go forward. And we'll use this upcoming advisory committee to hopefully to really help the institutions then with that translation problem, and with also maybe identifying something about going forward. What are they going to be looking for that then institutions will be alerted to, and start thinking about how to build those into their own program.
Thank you, and also mentioning the new task force, which our Deputy Commissioner calls a learning community. So, and I printed, so that the October board meeting would establish this, and it's like our committee has the rules, no statute, and so I printed that up in case you're interested how things work. But to me, what was interesting from this presentation from the accountability system is that I always thought about marketable skills immediately. What are the skills? And there are all these programs, and they have to get to the skills, and what are they, and how do you find them, and so on. But really, a whole different issue, which these questions show us, is somebody has to do the work and pull it together. And at each institution, who is doing it? Apparently, some have done it, some haven't done it yet, or are not ready to tell us about it. Who is responsible for it, and how is it being done? That's a whole different question than what is the skill. And so I thought maybe that might be interesting for you to look into. The Graduate Education Advisory Committee had some institutions come and talk about their processes as information, and to start discussion. What are the mechanisms needed to pull it off, and that may be something you might want to think about doing as well, if that is useful.
Are there any questions or comments? If not, then we'll move on to agenda item number 7. Update and discussion of coordinating board initiatives. And
So you'll see 2 things on there. The first one discusses our liaisons meetings. You'll see them listed there for you, for your review, 3 of them coming up next month, 28th and 29th. And then the 30th, you'll see they're separated by community, technical, and state colleges meeting, then a joint meeting of both. and then again solely the university and health-related institutions meetings. So again, there is a designated person at each institution of higher education to provide that single point of contact to strengthen and improve communication, because we're always seeking to do that between the coordinating board and all of you and your peers. And they're copied on all important coordinating board communication, anything noteworthy. And again, we host these annual meetings for liaisons to further that cause. It offers time to interact between the liaisons and staff here at the coordinating board, and an opportunity to update institutional liaisons on a variety of topics, and it allows us to gain insights and inputs from them. What's happening in the field, and what are the ongoing activities, suggestions, concerns, and again, we provide clarity and elaboration, just like I discussed earlier, that we try to do here as well for UEAC. They're also webcast and recorded, again, for your review and to share with your peers at your institutions and your colleagues. And are there any questions in that matter?
I get maybe a question and or a comment. At my institution, the institutional research function and the institutional effectiveness functions are separate, completely different offices, reporting up to completely, one reports to the president, one reports to the provost. And that single point of contact is really not beneficial at my particular institution, and I'm thinking some larger institutions may be bumping into the same problem because those functions are, there's the reporting function that's probably done by the IR, and then there's these other curricular functions that are probably handled under IE, or maybe not. So I know there's issues of space and whatnot, but it may not be the case in every institution that more than one representative is needed, but I wanted to put that out there. It is a concern for my institution.
Okay, thank you for sharing that concern. We'll note it.
Yeah. And another, I mean, you can watch it, you can watch the webcast, but you can't interact. So there's the disadvantage there, so.
Okay, I hear you. Thank
So
you.
yeah, it's a problem. So the problem is that the number of communications that go out is mind-boggling, if you will. And they always are sent to the president and the provost and so on. And but what we notice is that the people who work on it may not get it because it's somewhere. So the function of the liaison is really to know who should get it and move it on to that person. So if your institution is structurally, has several areas, that liaison should realize where to send it. And that's really the function, that we are assured that the right side of your house, if you will, gets it, which we may not know which one is the right side of the house. And so that is really why we selected one. So we have one person, and we know that person knows. Now, saying this, I think like you as UEAC member should know your liaison and get to know that person, that you're looped in what's important to you, and so that is easy. The liaison for these meetings, it's really a big educational meeting, because that person has to really know all the things we do in order to distinguish where to send it. And that's a big task. So the best thing is to tell that. But since we have so many, we can't invite more than one person per institution. Again, but the purpose of the liaison meeting is to give that knowledge to that person to make the best of it for the institution. If you are interested in some topics and want to go to the video, then you probably will pick the section which is of interest to you and not all of them. And if then at that point you need further interaction with the coordinating board, then please come to me or Melinda and we do that. that's how we hope it will work.
I don't think it works like that everywhere. I understand the hope. I don't think that it happens like that everywhere. Maybe.
Other similar comments from anyone else in that regard? Everyone knows their liaison? If you don't, I see a few heads shaking. Do you know who to go to or who to ask? Okay.
There's a quiz.
Thank you again for letting us know that and sharing that feedback. Appreciate you.
Are there any other questions or comments? If not, we'll move on to agenda item 8, consideration.
There's,
Oh, the open resource.
yes.
I'm sorry.
I keep telling Kyla now, we save the fun part to the end of the meeting. So my colleague.
I get the fun part.
I asked Dr. Tori to come up, and she's working on open educational resources. And this is something which is becoming quite exciting because it ties into the financial debt situation, and there's lots of exciting work done. And she has a little presentation what that work is. Oh, you have that?
Hi, everybody. All right, so you won't be able to see my name, but I'm Kyla Tori. I'm a program director here, and I deal with all the open educational resource initiatives that we do. So I am just going to give you sort of a basic overview. Thank you so much. Of what OER is and why we think it's important, and then I'll go into more specifics of what we're doing at the coordinating board. There we go. I can never figure out. So open educational resources, as defined in statute, are a teaching, learning, or research resource that is in the public domain or has been released under an intellectual property license that permits the free use, adaptation, and redistribution of the resource. So basically, instead of being copyrighted in the normal fashion, it's copyrighted in such a way that anyone can copy it, change it, remix it, and use it as they see fit in their classroom. There are different versions of the licenses. Usually they use what's called a Creative Commons license, and so sometimes it's more open. You can essentially do whatever you want with it as long as you give attribution to the person who created it. Sometimes you're not allowed to make derivatives, or you're not allowed to use it in a commercial way. It'll depend on the Creative Commons license that's placed on that particular item. So why do we think open educational resources are beneficial? So we think that there are benefits for students and for faculty. Certainly they're less expensive. Generally they're free, not always, but generally speaking, a lot of open educational resources are free. They're accessible, so mostly they're digital resources, and so they're available to students from the first day of their class. They don't have to wait for the book to come. And then the research that has been done says that they can lead to improved educational outcomes. So because students don't have to wait for the book, or because the book is not expensive and then they can purchase it rather than trying to live without it, it can lead to improved grades, it can lead to decreased drop withdrawal rates. That's some of the outcomes that we're seeing in the research that has been done. I will say that OER, as it is fairly new. It's been around for a little more than a decade, so there's not a ton of research yet, but there's also not a ton of research on the efficacy of textbooks as traditional textbooks. So it's just, what we are seeing is that it is beneficial for students. As far as being beneficial for faculty, because they're so flexible and you can adapt them in the way that you see fit to work within your institution and your course, it allows for a lot of freedom for faculty to do what they want. It allows them to personalize the resources so that they match the student outcomes of that course. Yes. So the 5 R's, as they said, which is what's on the slide, is how you know it's an open educational resource, is that you can do all of those things with it. And it just gives faculty more freedom to use that resource however they see fit. So what are we doing at the coordinating board? There's 2 big pieces of legislation. In the last session, in the 2017 session, Senate Bill 810 was passed, which established the OER grant program. And then in this past session, in 2019, a bill was passed to create the state repository for OER, so I'm going to talk about both of those things. So first, the Open Educational Resources Grant Program. Whoops. Yes, okay. So this is a grant program that's meant to encourage faculty to use OER in their courses. The grants are distributed directly to faculty. They don't go through the institution, so it's more or less additional income for that faculty member to incentivize them to spend the time and labor to either create or adapt or adopt resources that are OER. So in the first round of grants, the coordinating board gave $8,000 for faculty members who did this for one course and $16,000 for faculty members who did this for multiple courses. It actually started at $5,000 for one course and $10,000 for multiple courses, and then when the repository, which I'll talk about in a minute, became a reality, we offered a bit in addition to incentivize faculty to put their resources in the repository and maintain them over a longer period of time. So the first round of grants, the application deadline was August 20th of 2018, and we got 41 eligible applications from faculty members. We announced the grant awards in October of 2018. We selected 15 faculty members to receive grants, and then, so they have to create or adapt those resources and let us know what they're going to be using as far as OER goes. And then they have to teach the course 4 times within the grant period, which ends August 31st of 2021. And they're required through statute to report certain metrics to us, the amount of money saved based on what the textbook would have cost, drop withdrawal rates, grades, other faculty members who might adopt to the same resources, those sorts of things. These are our 2018 awardees. You can see it's a pretty good mix of 2-year and 4-year institutions that they come from, and a pretty good mix of courses. We chose to limit it to core curriculum courses in the first round. Everyone offers core curriculum courses, so it was, and also the enrollment, of course, in core curriculum courses is going to be higher, so we thought it would have a bigger impact. As far, there will be, so this past legislature this year appropriated additional funds for the grant program, so there will be another round. We're scheduled to release an RFA around January of next year. You can see that there are links there, which obviously you're not going to be able to click on them in your paper copy of this. So hopefully we can get this to you electronically. But there is I'll give you the OER grant program website at the end of this slide. There's a link to get through. If you go to the institutions, like resources for institutions section of our website, you can get to the grant opportunities place, and then there's also a place to sign up for e-updates where you get grant information. Yes.
Are these grants available for private institutions or only public?
So according to the rules right now, they're only available to public institutions. Sorry. Okay. Or I should say faculty who are employed by public institutions, since they go directly to the faculty. Okay, so tentatively, the RFA is not published yet. It will be published hopefully in January of 2020, but we're looking at the application deadline being around March 2020, announcing the grant awards by June, and then the grant period would end August 31st of 2023. So it would be the same deal where they would, the faculty member would have to teach the course 4 times during that grant period using OER. Are there any questions about the grant program before I move on to the repository?
How many awards do you anticipate? I might have missed that. How many awards you anticipated in the next round?
Sure, that's a good question. So the amount appropriated is about the same as it was during the last session. However, we were also appropriated money for the state repository, so it will kind of depend on how much the repository actually ends up costing and how much money we have left over from that, if we have any left over. So I would imagine somewhere between 15 and 20 grants, but sort of up in the air at this point. Yeah. Okay. So the state repository. So this would be a digital repository. The coordinating board will contract with an existing educational resource repository to create a portal specifically for Texas OER. And according to statute, that portal should be searchable by course or learning outcome, program or field of study, marketable skills, college readiness, and then other topics to be determined. So all of the current grantees for the OER grant program will upload or link their materials within this portal. And then any future grantees would also be required to put their resources in the portal. And then it would also link to other resource repositories that are out there. So there would be a wide variety of OER available through the Texas-specific site that could be searchable. It's supposed to be complete, well, it is mandated to be completed by September 1st of 2020. So we have a tight time schedule to finish it. We're gonna release a request for offer, I would say fairly soon, fall of this year, which is now, so it will be soon. And it will be posted in the Electronic State Business Daily and on our website, and it will be for organizations that already offer this service to create something specific for Texas.
I have a question on this one. Will there be any type of vetting for the quality of the resources that will be placed there and checks on whether there are Creative Commons licenses, so that if people are using the repository, they can feel confident of the material that's being posted?
Mm-hmm. That is a really good question. So as far as the grant program goes, the applications are looked at by content experts. The materials themselves are vetted for quality, but they're not peer-reviewed, right? So there's not resources for us to be able to do that, basically. But I think the way that could be done, and this is all sort of theoretical at this point because there is no repository, but for example, OER Commons has a sort of a rating system. Like if you bought something on Amazon and you rated it 4 stars and then you gave it some comments, like they have that for the OER items that are on their site. And I think that something like that could be done for the OER that's put on the Texas site. I don't know if that answers your question or not. Yeah.
Yes, I have some concerns about that, because it seems to me that one of the advantages of using textbooks is rigorous peer review. And as good as comments are on Amazon and other sites, I have used them to buy a number of things. They're not the same as rigorous academic peer review. And I wonder if, is the money in the appropriation earmarked specifically for grants? Could some of that also fund, could there be fewer grants and also a little bit set aside for peer reviewers?
For peer, yeah.
Because I'm afraid that wonderful OER resources without peer review could lead not only to questionable quality, but also issues with copyright if there wasn't some type of oversight of the materials being posted. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, it's a good comment, and I think it's a common concern when we look at OER to think about the copyright and the quality. I mean, one of the benefits of OER also is that the items can be continuously changed and updated and made better also, right? So I think, yeah, it's something that we'll take under consideration. Thank you for your comment. Do you want, Rex wants to add something.
Flashing red no matter what I do. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Yeah, this is something we've talked about at some length. And, you know, so the comments are, you know, part of that is sort of who's making the comment kind of thing, and whether they're, in some sense, qualified to make the comment, I guess, which I think is the point, Jacob, that you're really trying to make about the vetting piece of it. So we've talked about this a lot, and I think it's one of those things that going forward, you know, in the next round of this. So let me back up a step. So the legislature, I think, is really interested in this. So I think the money that's there will probably continue. And then I think part of it going forward would be not only to try to get more money for more grants, but also to seek additional funding to do some of the work that you're talking about. But as Kyla pointed out, you know, once you can revise it and so forth, and one of the beauties of it is you can make it your own, but then it becomes something different than what it was. And so how do you continually vet that? And I think that part of that ultimately will have to be done by the marketplace itself in some sense, and that an instructor people will vote with their feet, so to speak, or vote by adoption or non-adoption, really. And so this is really great. I'll take off from this or borrow it. And I was thinking about this not too long ago, and, you know, so then how do you track usage in some way? And so that if something is never used by anybody but the instructor themselves, that can tell you one of two things. One is that there's a whole bunch of other stuff out there, and every other instructor's already got their own stuff, which is highly unlikely, at least any time for the foreseeable future, or that no one else thinks it's worthy of adoption. And so I think there are some metrics that could be built into this in a way to try to achieve the kind of quality control that I think we all have a concern for.
And I will say that at least for the current grant program, for the deliverables that I've seen so far, many faculty members are adopting and adapting OER that exists, a lot of which is peer-reviewed, like OpenStax, and then some creating some assignments and things related to that. But the quality it's OER that's been used and sort of vetted already, that they're adapting and sort of curating for the core courses, if that makes sense, yeah.
So will the repository only consist of grantees' materials, or will there be an option for others? Because what you're describing, you know, I could trust, but when you open it up to other contributors is where the question comes in.
It will definitely consist of grantees, and it will definitely link to other sources of OER that exist, like OER Commons and things of that nature. Other decisions have not yet been made at this point. We haven't even released the RFO, so yeah.
So just one last comment, that if there are any committees or peer reviews, I would encourage inclusion of directors of librarians as well as the academics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Presentation.
I've been to a lot of library conferences about OER. There's a lot of involvement, which is great. Yeah. Okay, so this is the OER grant program website, which is where the RFA will be posted once it goes out. If you go to our main website, towards the bottom, there's a little envelope that looks like you're going to email someone, but it's actually for our e-updates. If you click on that, you can choose to get grant updates. And so when the memo goes out announcing the RFA, it will come to you. The grant program email box is there. It goes to me. You can also email me. My email address is there. So if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to hear them. Yeah, if there's anything else. Great, thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Kyla? Kyla? I'm sorry. If not, we'll move on to agenda item 8, consideration of future work and meeting dates.
So that's our final, for those who are new and who have done this before, the committee expressed an interest to have the meeting set up always on the third Friday in April and September. And I realize that may change over time, so if you have some ideas that you don't like this or something else might be better, let me know. But that gives us a certain consistency. Now, we have run into problems before that. There are holidays and so on. I tried to look this up for next year, and I don't think there are conflicts. I do hope so, because we set also up we reserve the boardroom a year in advance, otherwise we won't get it. And also, but more critical is if one of you has a professional meeting or something going on, then you can't make it. But if 10 of you have a professional meeting you all go to, and we don't know about it, then that's a problem because we can't really form a group. So let me know if that is the case. But otherwise, these are the 2 dates which we have selected for next year. And the last item there is that Christina will again send out the little doodle poll, how much it costs you to do business here. That's part of our report to the board. All committees do that. They want to know how much the effort costs. It's fairly simple, and you say how much the travel costs and the time cost and the other costs are, and you fill it out, and I sum it up and average it and come out with a number. So that has been working very well, and the poll is the easiest way to do it. That's all I have to say to that.
Does anyone have any other questions about anything on the agenda? Any other comments? If not, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Is there a second?
Thank you.
All those in favor say aye. Those opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you, and we are adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Sorry, Ron Holt. I didn't see it.